So let's first start with Rafah. As we know, earlier, President Biden said that an invasion into Rafah would be a red line. Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't seem to agree. He said that, quote, no force in the world could stop an Israeli invasion into Rafah. And he said that a date has been set for that. Is there any indication of when that date would be?
Well, we don't know when that date would be. We also just don't know that there is a date. There's conflicting reports on there. The prime minister has said there is a date. There have been other leaks reports that the defense minister said there isn't a date yet. So we don't really know exactly what's going on, if this is posturing or if this is a true military plan in place. I have heard from very high level sources that whether there is a next step in Rafah or not, what we have seen over the last few days of the Israeli withdrawal from southern Gaza was pre-planned. Now, whether they were pre-planning it to happen on this Sunday at this time, immediately following a very tense phone call with the President of the United States, I find doubtful. But they said that once military objectives in Khan Yunis were reached, they would no longer need a massive ground force there. They could withdraw those forces, which include a lot of the commando special forces, to prepare for other battles to come, whether it's in Rafah, whether it's being sent back in for special operations like we saw at the Al-Shifa hospital, where hundreds of Hamas leaders had crept back in believing they could set up shop, but the Israelis actually saw it happening, laid a trap, and then had a surprise raid to get a lot of Hamas leaders that had tried to go back into the hospital. And so there also is obviously the possibility of forces being needed on the northern border, where Hezbollah out of southern Lebanon is attacking Israel on a daily basis, threatening to escalate. And they are keeping forces in central Gaza. There's one brigade that is taking control and keeping control of the major east-west highway that divides northern and southern Gaza, and then also some of the key patrol and convoy routes that you would need for aid distribution, both along the Mediterranean and along the border with Israel. So, will there be a Rafah operation? How do we sort of put the president's, claim of a red line and repeated statements now we've seen that there is complete opposition to any ground operation in Rafah, to the Israelis being very firm, saying they can't have victory over Hamas without taking Rafah? Well, I think we need to go a little deeper here and try to sort out, is there a complete contradiction, or is this a lot of political positioning around trying to find a way of achieving the military objectives by other rhetoric, perhaps? What does Israel need to have happen in order to have a military operation successful in Rafah? Well, the civilian population needs to clear out as much as possible. Well, you have not just the population of Rafah, you have the million Palestinians who moved from northern Gaza all the way south towards Rafah by this point in the war, because the Israelis started in northern Gaza and moved their way south. And it's been a big concern to the Biden administration, and quite frankly, the Israelis as well. How do you begin this operation without evacuating so many people, and where will they go? Well, if Israel has wrapped up most of its ground operations in southern Gaza, withdrawn its forces, it is possible to see the natural flow of population start heading back north in a controlled manner, in a screening that is controlled by the IDF to make sure Hamas does not go with that population flow. And that's a big, big caveat. There's also the potential to give more room for people to go into Khan Yunis or to go into other areas that the IDF might facilitate evacuations without any hindrance of the IDF being there, any threat of being hit accidentally by a strike against Hamas on your way of evacuating. So Israel is facilitating in some ways the beginning stages of what could be an evacuation, whether it's natural, we would call it evacuation, it's just simply people returning out of Rafah, or an actual evacuation. The next piece, you can't take Rafah without securing its southern flank with Egypt. Obviously, that's a fallback position. That's an escape position for Hamas. That is a resupply potential through the smuggling in the tunnels there. And so some plan needs to be achieved that Egypt buys into, potentially, with U.S. support, for the IDF to take that key corridor that separates Rafah and Egypt. Right there, they call it the Philadelphia corridor. You'll hear about that in the news in the coming weeks. And then the last piece is Israel needs to get at the tunnels. And that's where I think it's hard to imagine you have a conflict over Rafah that doesn't involve people in Rafah fighting not just the 4 battalions that are in Rafah, but getting at the tunnel infrastructure that is underneath Rafah. That's where I don't see how you can square the circle. If it's going to remain the president's red line that the IDF can't enter Rafah in a ground operation, then you're never going to get the Hamas leaders and you're never going to get the hostages.